Good morning. And I apologize, we do not have a sound system today, so if you cannot hear me, please raise your hand and I'll try to get closer to you. Uh, what?
Talk louder.
All right. So I appreciate everybody coming out today. I mean, it's a cold, dreary day, but this is an important event that has been going on for 57 years. So thank you again. And as we begin today's program, I would like to welcome Pastor Jeff Ewing of the First Lutheran Church, who will lead us in the invocation. Pastor Jeff, please.
Thanks, man. It's okay. I'm going to move this up even a little closer so you can hear a little bit better. Let us pray. God of all nations, as we gather here today, we come before your loving presence with grateful hearts. We thank you for the opportunity to raise these flags, symbols of the people who have come before us and of our nation. Remind us of the good values, ideals, and standards that come from all four cultures. We ask for your divine guidance to live out those principles and your blessing as we begin this ceremony. Amen.
The first four flags observance occurred in 1968, and today, as I said before, marks the 57th annual observance of the raising of the four flags here at Heritage Point. Thank you for joining us in this ceremony, which honors the city's rich history and recognizes the significance of the various nations which have held dominion over this area. I invite you to review the last page of today's program to learn more about the history of the four flags. Today's color guard, which will raise each of the four flags, is comprised members of Boy Scout Troop 13 of the Chief Corn Planter Council, which is sponsored by the North Warren Presbyterian Church. And I'd like to thank the Boy Scouts for their service to the community throughout. Norm Ewing, president of the Warren Lions Club, will now present the color guard with the first flag to be raised. This flag represents the Seneca Nation of Indians, which was the first nation to live and in this area, obviously. Normally the Trail of Tears would be played, but without a sound system, we will have to skip over that. Seneca flag? The second flag to be raised is the French Fleur de Lis. French claimed dominion over this land in the late 1600s and attempted to enforce that claim when, in the summer of 1794, Celeron de Bainesville, party of French explorers, planted a lead plate at the confluence of the Conewago Creek and the Allegheny River, along with other strategic plates. According to accounts of the day, Celeron offended many of the North Americans who inhabited these lands and who subsequently removed many of those buried plates. Marinda Munskard, representing the Warren Kiwanis Club, will now present the color guard with the French fleur-de-lis. Under the direction of Marshall White, the Warren High School Band will play La Marseillaise, the French national anthem. Please. The third flag to be raised is the King's Colors, which represents the British rule of the territories and colonies which now make up the eastern United States. The British were present during much of the time that Celeron made his expedition and were ordered to leave the area. However, he was largely ignored. Brenda Jones, representing the Warren Rotary Club, will present the King's Color to the color guard, and the band will play God Save the King. Fourth flag to be raised represents the United States. The flag to be raised today is the Betsy Ross flag, the first American flag to feature the Stars and Stripes. It should be noted that this is an historical flag and therefore is not subject to all of the rules regarding the position and dominance of the official flag of the United States. It is, however, given an appropriate place of prominence at the forefront of the four flags and is illuminated each night as the official flag would be. Fran Perrin, representing the Daughters of the American Revolution, will present the Betsy Ross flag to the color guard. Please rise and remove your hats while the band plays the national anthem.
Forward march.
Please be seated. It is now my great honor to introduce today's speaker, Ellen Paquette, who is the 7th generation Native American of Warren County. I like to acknowledge that Chase Putnam, her father, is in the audience, and he has contributed to the Warren County Historical Society in recording various parts of history of this county. But Ellen Paquette credits her love of history to deep family roots and hearing stories about the women and men who were her ancestors, including Scottish and English immigrants, New England farmers, abolitionists, teachers, carpenters, wagon makers, seamstresses, cheesemakers, and rivermen. A 1987 graduate of Warren Area High School, Ellen earned a college degree in art in New Hampshire. She remained in that area for several years, doing work as varied as artisan, retail associate, pottery decorator, ski instructor, and field archaeologist. She returned to Warren in the late 1998 and decided where to go next and never left. Ellen is passionate about her being involved in her local community as a volunteer and has served on the boards of the Struthers Library Theater, Warren Players, the Warren Public Library, the Community Foundation of Warren County, and the Audubon Community Nature Center. She is the historian of the Library Theater and also volunteers for Hospice of Warren County, providing bedside harp music. Ellen is a self-employed artist and musician. You may see her artwork in regional galleries or at fine art festivals or even a Renaissance fair. She will be busking on the streets near you later this summer. She resides with her husband Thomas on the edge of the woods just outside of Warren city limits and is so glad she decided to come home and stay almost 27 years. Ellen Paquette, please.
Oh, you brave souls. I think there's some really dedicated band parents out here. Okay, I guess I have to remember remember how to project so you can hear me. If I get a little too quiet, just give me the universal "I can't hear you" sign. I'm so excited to be here. And there we go. If you've heard me talk about local history before, don't panic because it's only 6 pages. It's fine. It's an honor to speak at the Four Flags ceremony today. I attended this event all through my childhood, and it always felt for me like the beginning of summer. And it's a special weekend. It is the beginning of summer. It's primarily we're here this weekend celebrating Memorial Day, where we honor all fallen and deceased members of the U.S. military. And of course, here in Warren, we have the extra bonus of recognizing the complex heritage of sovereignty over our region, represented by the flags of the Seneca Nation, France, Great Britain, and the United States of America. I'm happy to be here with you this morning. I would like to note that my dad, Chase Putnam, contrary to Tuesday's newspaper article about today's ceremony, is in fact alive, and he's here. To slightly misquote Mark Twain, the report of his death was an exaggeration. Thank goodness. Let us note, before I dive in, that Warren is celebrating 2 significant anniversaries this year. This is the 230th anniversary of our town, which was surveyed and laid out in 1795. It's also the 250th anniversary of the death of the county's and our town's namesake, a patriot and physician from colonial Massachusetts, Dr. Joseph Warren, who was killed in action at the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. How's my volume? Okay? Okay, good. Now, before I get up to full speed, full disclosure, I am a proud river rat. Are there any other river rats out here today? Raise your hand. Mostly just my family. Okay, well, maybe I'll turn some of you into river rat wannabes as I talk, because I'm going to be talking a lot about the river today. I come by my river rat nature honestly, having grown up playing in Jackson Run every summer and boating with my family on area waterways. And I also come by it genetically, as I am descended from 2 great-great-grandfathers who worked the river on lumber rafts. One of them for over 40 years and as a pilot. I am so in love with the Allegheny River, and I dream about it all winter long. I can't wait for that first spring float. And it's no accident that our town sits on the confluence of the Conowongo Creek and Allegheny River. I'll elaborate on that shortly, but let's start with an exercise for the mind's eye. And because we are outside today, and thank you all for braving it, I don't have to try to describe in a room what we are looking at right now. So let's go back in time over 170 years ago to an April day in 1852. We're on the south bank of the Allegheny in what will one day become Crescent Park. 2 steam packet boats, the Allegheny Belle and the Clara Fisher, have arrived on the same day, which was a very unusual circumstance. A packet boat, if you don't know, was a vessel that transported mail and cargo and passengers on a regular schedule. We're looking across at the area in the vicinity of our current Veterans Memorial Bridge, and we can see a variety of watercraft all throughout here, including those 2 steamboats, several lumber rafts of various sizes, a flatboat and a keelboat, which were also boats that transported goods and people. Now this whole area here that we can see was called the Warren Eddy, and it was a hot spot of river activities for a variety of reasons. Because if you've been out here on a summer evening in a boat, you know it's calm, it's fairly deep, and this is where the smaller lumber rafts that had come from upstream, the Conowongo and other tributaries, would join up to make larger rafts for the journey onward. And this was also the location of Warren's Industrial Island, which was a man-made island that is now the location of the parking garage, the condos, and the thriving businesses in the former Loringer manufacturing building. Now, if you were to be here in 1852 and look just downstream, it'd be within sight of where we are now, you'd see a massive covered bridge crossing the river from Hazel to Main Street, and this was Warren's first bridge. Built in 1839, and unfortunately it kind of succumbed to the elements and was collapsing by 1855. But in low water and evening light, now in 2025, if you're out here in the eddy, you can see timbers and stones from the single massive central pier that held up that bridge. They're still there, and you can touch them with a boat paddle. It's a really fun thing to go out there on a beautiful summer evening, kind of take a look in that raking light, and you'll find them. They're right there to touch. In fact, in 2020, the COVID summer, one of those massive, I tried to measure it, it was over 30 feet long, massive old growth timber popped right up out of the river. And someone finally tied a white milk jug to it because it was a little bit of a hazard for oncoming boats. And then it worked its way back down. So, of course, in early days before we even had those bridges, there were ferries at points all up and down the river to facilitate crossing. So a little more about the island. This was Florence's first industrial park, and this was not a natural island. It was created when a mill race was dug to power mills on that island by water wheel. And the race began at the former Lowhead Dam on the Conowongo Creek, which I'm sure everyone here can remember. And it exited just upstream from Hickory Creek, just to the right of the bridge as we're looking. Many businesses were located on this island, including just a few, the Phoenix Furniture Company, Paiso Company of Paiso's Cure for Consumption, which was eventually deemed to just be snake oil and could give you a fun bit of a high, but wouldn't cure your consumption. And Kerberger Paint Shop. By the 1940s, some of these buildings were still in place but not highly active. So by 1964, that race was filled in, and the last factory buildings on the island were razed, and that land was joined back to the mainland. But let's go back even further and acknowledge that this entire region was Seneca land for millennia before its appropriation by settlers of European descent. The shores of the Allegheny River and its tributaries provided ideal locations for Seneca villages and camps. And for the Seneca, the Allegheny was a means of transportation in a vast fishery. They called it the Beautiful River. And when the French came along, they called it La Belle Rivière. This heavily forested region was a wilderness of hardwood, hemlock, and pine that was almost inaccessible except through these natural water channels. And that's how the first French explorers entered the region around 1669. English trappers and traders arrived in flatboats and canoes by the early 1700s. As this wilderness, which was just full of natural resources, was coveted by European traders and settlers, and that led to our first major industry here, timber harvesting. Now, because I love this river and this river's history, we can't talk about it without its history as the way that timber made its way out of our region. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. I'll try to make it exciting. The clearing of land for timber opened opportunities for farming, and settlers soon flooded in, and sawmills were built on all these streams in the area that led to the three major tributaries of the Allegheny, the Conowongo, the Broken Straw, and the Allegheny, or the Kinzig Creeks. This is what happens. I start to get so excited that my voice goes faster and faster. I get dehydrated. I almost hyperventilate. It's not going to happen today. I get strangely excited about local history. Okay, so the transportation of this lumber that came from these big, beautiful these gorgeous forests fueled the early development of Warren as an economic center. And the rafting of lumber out of Warren County was underway by 1797. So we are designated in what is called the Upper Allegheny region. And the river begins at the spring in a field in northern Pennsylvania's Potter County near Powdersport. It loops north into New York State and returns to Pennsylvania in the Allegheny Reservoir. The forests of the Upper Allegheny produced massive growth white pine that was especially valuable, even making its way time tales of Warren County, the river was the great central artery of life, the highway out into the world. Now I'm going to elaborate on what exactly lumber rafting looked like during its heyday. First, the forests were leveled to access that valuable white pine, hardwoods, and hemlock. And of course, we now know that full-scale clear cutting equals destruction of ecosystems. And it's not the way to ensure the regeneration of forests. But these early lumber barons saw fortunes fall into their hands with the cutting of timber and weren't thinking long-term. This cut timber was skidded to those water-powered mills that I referred to. Logs were sawn into boards and assembled into rafts. Timber and rafts moved down waterways in the high water of spring melts, the most dangerous time of year to be waterborne, but the heightened water levels were necessary. So if we look at the river today, we know it's unusually high water for this time of year. However, this is perfect lumber rafting level. And this is not a time that nowadays anyone would recommend going out on the water. But it took these levels to be able to move these massive rafts down the river. And I'll talk more about how dangerous that actually was in a bit. Now the sizes of these rafts were dictated by the width of the waterways on which they were built. A basic unit was a 16 by 16 foot platform of up to 30 alternating courses of boards bound together by grubs, which were oak saplings with roots. There was no metal hardware used in assembling these massive, incredibly heavy rafts. And if you think about 30 alternating courses of sawn boards, that drafted about 2 feet below the water level and 2 feet above. So we've got that core of a 16 by 16 foot platform. As I said, the rafts were dictated by the waterway they were coming down. So a Conowongo raft was 170 feet long by 17 feet wide, with one oar at each end. That was our main unit. And then once we got down here into the Warren Eddy, 6 Conowongos were joined to make an Allegheny raft, which was 340 feet long by 51 feet wide. 3 Alleghenies could be joined up once they reached the Ohio to make an Ohio raft, which covered more than an acre of water. And these were steered by long wooden oars and verbal cues given by a pilot. So an Allegheny raft, which would have been assembled right in here, typically had 12 hands on board, a cook and a pilot. And imagine all this buzzing activity in the Warren Eddy for a period of over 100 years. Rafts coming downstream and being strapped together to create even bigger rafts for the trip south. So how fast could these big, heavy rafts go? Well, traveling 30 miles in a day was decent mileage, and that's pretty fast. But remember, we're moving on high water. Once the raft was dismantled and the lumber sold anywhere between Pittsburgh and New Orleans, rivermen had to get home, and sometimes they walked the whole way. If they were lucky, they could catch a stagecoach or a wagon headed north for parts of the journey, but until steamships and railroads were available, they had to foot it. And of course, bandits were known along the way, and they were a real threat because these men were carrying their well-earned earnings in their pockets, and they were easy targets. Okay, what kind of people would do this sort of job? Well, it was an incredibly dangerous business. You're moving on high water, and pilots had to know the river like the back of their hand. They learned to read the river not just through personal experience, but with the help of the Allegheny Pilot, which is a printed, detailed guide that mapped out all the hazards on the river. And it's really interesting. You can find it online and breeze through it. It's the Allegheny Pilot. And if you are a boater, you know how the Allegheny can change day to day. Its personality is always on the move. Rock bars move, strainers pop in and out. You never quite know what you're going to be in for. Now, professional lumberjacks work the river, but men working on rafts originating in Warren County were mostly young farmers and townsmen who just wanted to earn extra money and see the new country outside of their little town. So because of this, many of these men, they couldn't swim, and drownings occurred simply because a man fell injuries and maiming were frequent. But you did have some nice amenities on board the rafts. The rations usually consisted of salt pork, potatoes, biscuits, coffee, tea, brown sugar, beans, eggs, and whiskey. I did read somewhere that eventually whiskey was eliminated. However, emergency whiskey suppliers were plying the waters further south, and these bootleggers were known as river pirates, and they would row out to the rafts with their merch, tie on, and sell the liquor to the rafts. The crew slept on bunks and benches in the cooking shanty, which sat right in the middle of the raft, where there was actually a fire for warmth. If you were lucky, if you could get a spot closer to the fire. The Warren to Pittsburgh trip was about 3 days long. It's about 192 miles by river. And a good fiddler could usually get a job on a raft, or an accordion player, because a very good fiddler or musician helped keep men on the raft at night if there was a tempting tavern or brewery nearby. Raftsmen also sang songs while they worked to keep their rhythm up with steering. And lyrics of some of these old songs have lent themselves to the hard labor, have been preserved, fortunately. I now have a section called Dangers on the River, as if I haven't already talked about them. But let's add some more. The Allegheny was considered the most technically difficult part of the journey south from the upper Allegheny to New Orleans. And it was definitely too dangerous to raft at night. Rafting at night was common on the wider rivers. Because of all these islands and rocks and twists and narrows, the most accidents, injuries, and loss of lumber occurred on the Allegheny. Lumber lost in breakups was finders keepers, and many houses were built down the river with salvaged pieces of lumber. We also had fog, high winds, collisions, mill dams in low water, water levels too high or too low, all hazards. My great-great-grandpa Charles Chase, who was a river pilot and went off to work the rivers at age 16, he considered fog the most dangerous and trying situation ever. South of Pittsburgh, diseases such as dysentery, malaria, and yellow fever were a threat, and on the Mississippi, pirates or robbers were not uncommon at all. So armed guards were sometimes taken along on rafts, and then they would accompany the raftsmen back home as they walked home. Okay, let's return our mind's eye to the Warren Eddy of 1852, right out here, to witness the most challenging and dangerous task in maneuvering a raft. And this was stopping it, which was an operation at the request of someone did a calculation of the weight of an Allegheny raft, million pounds. So this high, fast water and an incredible weight of a large, blunt object. It had to be stopped. So this was so exciting that people would gather at the eddy up on the banks to watch by the hundreds. It was an art to properly snub a raft. Now you might think there's a really special technique, but what it involves is two of the crew would row ashore in a small boat that always lived on that raft with a rope attached to the raft. One of them would jump out of the boat, run down the riverbank ahead of the raft, looking for a very sturdy tree. He would wind the rope around the trunk and just pray the trunk would hold. They didn't always hold. Sometimes they snapped, broke, pulled right out of the bank. Sometimes fast-flying rope broke an arm or a leg, or rope coils would snag a crew member and drag him under the water. As I said, it was a dangerous business. We have no record of any other method that was used to stop a raft, so I guess that was generally the most effective. Now, rafts did not only serve as a means of moving lumber downstream, they also would be piled up with freshly cut shingles, trade goods, passengers, and eventually, when oil was discovered in the region, barrels of oil. However, once the 30-year heyday of steamboats in the region started in 1830, steamboats, which could move upstream, not just downstream, took over some of the business of transporting goods and passengers. By 1859, steamboat traffic it only had about a 30-year range, was ebbing. And by 1866, the last steamboat to come here into the Warren Eddy was the Annie Lavelle, which was picking up oil field supplies. This is when the entry of railroads happened, and this increased the trade in goods and banks, and manufacturing and retail surged. So that passenger trade that formerly would have jumped on rafts or keelboats jumped on trains. And I think this is interesting to think about. It's hard to imagine. We had lots of little passenger stations in the county. We had a beautiful big station right down on Pennsylvania Avenue on the west side. By 1895, we had 22 passenger trains serving Warren a day. Now, rafting did continue almost, well, at least the early 1900s, but those old growth forests that had been the source of such valuable timber were dwindling. The rafting era ended just after 1900, when the last stand of virgin pine was cut at Drudgerville. Now, let's move forward into the present. That's your picture of what this could have looked like on a busy day for well over 100 years here in Warren. And I'm hoping that when you look the river, you won't just see water moving, something I have to cross on a bridge. I want to get out there in my boat. I want you to think about how this river is why we're here, why this community even began. It's a living, breathing thing. And the wonderful phenomenon I've witnessed since returning home over 20 years ago is how we as a community are turning our faces back to the river, having literally had the backs of our business district turned toward it for so long. It's as if more of us all the time are realizing that this beautiful natural resource in the heart of our town has something for each of us to enjoy. Whether it's a paddle in a kayak or canoe, a float in a fishing boat, or just sitting at its edge and enjoying watching it roll by. River towns are really special. They've got a thriving, ever-moving ecosystem running right through them. And we are especially lucky that our river is showing signs of becoming cleaner and healthier all the time. This trajectory requires our stewardship and our vigilance. So please join me as a fellow river rat. Dip your toes in the Allegheny, maybe not today, but or just listen to its voice as it flows by. It is indeed a beautiful river. Thank you.
Well, we are certainly grateful that she decided to stay in Warren and continue recording our fine history. On behalf of the Four Flags Joint Service Committee, I would like to extend a most sincere thank you to the many people and organizations who contributed to this annual observance and who are recognized in the program. Without their helping hands and financial support, this would not be possible. These flags come at no small expense, and the Four Flags Joint Service Committee wishes to give special thanks to the Warren Service Clubs and the City of Warren for their generous contributions to keep the flags flying each summer. Should you wish to contribute tax-deductible gifts in support of program, it can be made to the Warren County Development Association or WCCBI. Please note the gift is for Four Flags. I'd like to thank all of you coming in this type of weather, and please remember those who have departed before us. Have a very enjoyable Memorial Day and a great weekend, and thank you again for coming. Appreciate it very much.